Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
Domestic violence shatters lives, yet more than 1,000 women have been turned away from refuges since the start of this year. The Bureau of Investigative Journalism has also found that cash-strapped councils have cut their funding for domestic violence shelters by almost a quarter since 2010, leaving many vulnerable women with nowhere to go. Fatima Manji reports.
It was absolute blind terror, desperation and panic.
You leave your whole life behind, you leave everything behind. It's a horrible, horrible feeling.
We ran for our lives. My children didn't even have shoes on their feet when we escaped.
For some women facing domestic violence, leaving home can be a matter of life and death. So imagine finding out there is nowhere safe to turn. When Freya left her abusive partner, she contacted a number of women's refuges. Each time she was told there's no space.
It confirms all of the psychological abuse tactics that an abuser will use to isolate you, to make you believe that nobody cares and that there is no help. Quite often that's actually the reality, and it makes it almost impossible to escape.
Freya and her 2 children ended up in emergency housing, a mixed-sex hostel.
My children would scream every morning because they didn't have hot water in the showers. I would have to bathe my children with one hand and hold the door shut with the other hand because there wasn't any locks. There was vermin. When I moved in, I had to scrub the walls down with bleach because there were feces and blood on the walls.
At any point did you think maybe I should just go back because there was nowhere else for you to stay?
Multiple times, although that would have been a death sentence.
New figures show since the beginning of this year, more than 1,000 women have been turned away from refuges because of a lack of resources or space. They've ended up in this situation because domestic violence refuges tend to rely on local authority funding more than any other income source. And that's drying up.
On average, local authority spending on women's refuges has dipped by 24% since 2010. Some have dropped much further. Spending has fallen by 56% in Bradford, 64% in Lambeth and 75% in Haringey. At this refuge in Thanet, they are saying no regularly. For each room here, up to 8 women are turned away. Those who do get a place are staying on for longer because of the housing crisis. A few years ago, an average resident would stay for 3 months. Now it's 6 months. And because of a lack of resources, the more complex cases, victims who may also have mental health or addiction issues are now much less likely to get a place.
There are women who definitely have a level of need that there will be multiple refuges turning them down. And I think they're the women that we think are probably at most risk in our society generally. And there will be a lot of homeless women. I mean, definitely in Kent, everybody's doing the best with what they've got. And for me, this is a systemic issue. This is an issue of not enough resources coming out centrally to really care for those that need the care most.
Karen and her teenage daughter came to this refuge a few years ago. It wasn't just a safe place to stay. They were given counselling and help with finding a new school.
You come from a nice home and then all of a sudden you're living in one room, and I had about 2 black bags full of bits and pieces with me. It's horrible. I don't think we would have been where we are today if I hadn't have had that. I mean, I've got quite a good job now. My daughter's in university, she's doing really well, and it just made all of the difference to us.
So how do you feel now, knowing that since the beginning of this year, 1,000 women have been turned away from refuges?
It breaks my heart. It really does. You know, because very often they've got nowhere to go.
The Department for Communities and Local Government told us they're investing £40 million of dedicated funding to domestic abuse services over 4 years. So far, half of that has been allocated to local authorities, and this will go towards creating more than 2,200 bed spaces. But analysis from the Bureau of Investigative Journalism shows not all areas received funding.
And even in those areas that were funded, the amount varies wildly. In Cumbria, they received £3.52 per adult woman, while here in Kent, it's just 11p.
The government has to recognise that refuges are a nationwide network. There must be no survivor in our country who doesn't have a place of safety to go to. It can't be a postcode lottery.
The women we spoke to in this film are now staying in safe places. But with refugees clearly struggling, how many more victims of domestic violence will be turned away this year?
Fatima Manji reporting.
I've been getting away with it.